Hello everyone. Please tell me, which city are you listening from? What time is it there? Is everything okay? Or does it feel like someone's watching you? It was an ordinary evening, at least it started that way. The kind of night where everything feels still, almost too quiet. I had just finished dinner, a simple meal, and was winding down for the evening. The rain had started to fall outside, a soft patter against the windows, the sound that always made my apartment feel cozier. I sat on the couch with a book, my legs tucked under the blanket, the soft glow of the lamp lighting the pages. The comfort of the evening was soothing, and for a while, I lost myself in the words. Time passed, and I didn't even notice how late it had gotten until I glanced at the clock. It was just after midnight. I stretched, setting my book down on the coffee table, and stood up. The rain had intensified, the sound of it louder now, filling the room. I turned off the lamp and headed toward the bedroom, ready to end the night. It was a small apartment, and the hallway between the living room and bedroom wasn't far. As I made my way into the bedroom, I flicked the light switch beside the door. The room was just as I had left it: bed, neatly made, clothes folded on the chair, the usual quiet ambience. I paused for a moment, standing in the center of the room, listening to the rain against the window. The quiet felt comforting, almost too comfortable. It felt like nothing could disturb me here, in this small bubble of warmth and security. I walked over to the bed, pulled back the covers, and began to settle in. But before I could lie down, I froze. There was something off, a subtle shift in the room, something I couldn't quite place. It was as though the air had thickened, becoming heavier in a way that made it hard to breathe. I glanced around, my eyes moving from corner to corner, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The bed was where I had left it. The curtains hung perfectly still, but there was something, a feeling deep in my chest, that told me I wasn't alone. It wasn't just a general sense of unease, it was more specific. Like someone was here, but hidden in the shadows. Something waiting. I shook the feeling off. I was just tired, I thought. It was probably the rain, the stillness of the room, playing tricks on my mind. I turned to climb into bed and pulled the covers over me, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that had settled in my gut. That's when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe a branch brushing against the window. But then it came again, a light, dragging noise. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding as I strained to listen. It wasn't coming from the window. It wasn't coming from outside at all. It was coming from the ceiling. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The scratching was faint, but distinct, like fingernails lightly dragging across the surface. The sound was slow and deliberate, and it seemed to be moving across the ceiling, from one side of the room to the other. I stared at the ceiling, unable to move. My mind raced with questions. What was it? The wind? An animal? I didn't know, but it didn't sound like either. It sounded like something was crawling up there, its movements far too deliberate to be random. I held my breath, listening, waiting for the noise to stop. But instead, it grew louder. The scratching was joined by a soft tapping, almost rhythmic, like something or someone was making its way across the ceiling, carefully, as if testing the surface, moving inch by inch. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The room felt cold, colder than it should have been, and I could feel the floor beneath me growing unsteady, as though the entire room was shifting. I told myself it was just my imagination. It had to be. There was no way something could be crawling on the ceiling. But as the sound continued, I realized it was moving closer, closer to the center of the room. I turned my head, eyes wide with fear, and looked up. At first, there was nothing. Just the ceiling above me, a quiet expanse of white paint and shadow. But then I saw it movement. Something dark shifting against the pale backdrop of the ceiling, something long and twisted. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, frozen in place. A figure, small at first, began to emerge. It crawled slowly across the ceiling, its body writhing and shifting like it was struggling to move, but determined to get closer. I could barely make out the shape. It was too dark, too distorted, but it was there, crawling. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I recognized. The limbs were too long, too thin, the body bending unnaturally, the way a spider's legs might contort. The figure moved, its dark form dragging itself across the ceiling, coming closer with every passing second. And then I saw its face. It was upside down, twisted. Its features weren't clear at first, but as it inched closer, they became sharper, too sharp. Eyes wide open, unblinking, with black, hollow pupils. A mouth that stretched impossibly wide, its edges torn, like it had been ripped open, and it wasn't making a sound. The scratching stopped, but the tapping grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't look away. My heart was pounding in my chest, the fear pressing against me, suffocating me. The thing was so close now, right above me, its body half hanging from the ceiling, and it was staring at me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. For a moment, everything stopped. The thing was just hanging there, staring at me, as if it was waiting for something. And then, in a motion so quick I couldn't even process it, it dropped. It fell, its limbs sprawling and twisting in mid-air, landing with a sickening thud on the floor beside my bed. Coat. I scrambled back, my body frozen in terror, my heart thudding against my chest as I stared at it. The thing didn't move. It just lay there, still, its dark eyes staring straight into mine. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with dread, the silence now deafening. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The figure vanished into the shadows, like it had never been there at all. The room was silent, empty, save for the pounding of my heart. I stayed awake the rest of the night, unable to tear my eyes from the shadows in the corners of the room. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind, every shift of the walls made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. And the next morning, when the sun finally rose, I thought maybe I had imagined it. But when I looked up at the ceiling, I saw it just a small crack, barely noticeable, but enough to make my stomach churn. I don't sleep in that room anymore. I can't. The memory of what I saw, the thing crawling across the ceiling, its hollow eyes watching me, is still too fresh in my mind. I try to block it out, but every time I close my eyes, I feel its presence. I hear the tapping, the scratching, the dragging across the ceiling, and I know, deep down, that it's still out there, waiting, watching. It started innocently enough. I had just moved into my new apartment, and, like most people, I had spent the first few nights adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings. The building was old vintage, really, and though the creaky floors and the occasional draft through the windows were a bit unsettling at first, I grew to appreciate its charm. There was something comforting about the imperfections, the quiet hum of history that seemed to hang in the air. The apartment had a character to it that made it feel warm, even on the coldest nights. I set up my bedroom in the corner of the apartment, opposite the bathroom, with a large antique mirror on the wall above a dresser. The mirror was old, and while it had a certain elegance to it, it also gave off a strange vibe, like it had seen too many things over the years. But that was just me being paranoid, right? I wasn't one to believe in superstitions or ghosts, or anything like that. It was just a mirror. Nothing more. For the first few days, everything was fine. I'd come home from work, kick off my shoes, and relax, reading or watching TV before heading to bed. But it was around the fifth night that things started to feel different. I remember exactly when it happened. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was about to head to bed when I passed by the mirror. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just my reflection. You know, the way we all do a double take when we're still getting used to new places. But as I caught sight of her, I froze. It wasn't me. It was someone else standing in the reflection. A woman. She looked like me, but her eyes were wide, almost too wide. Her hair was the same, though it looked damp, hanging in dark strands that framed her face. She had an odd, vacant expression, her lips pressed into a thin line, and then she waved. It wasn't a casual wave. It wasn't like a friendly hello. It was slow, deliberate. It wasn't as though she had just raised her hand out of reflex. No, it was as if she was waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to see her. Her eyes locked with mine through the glass, and for a moment it felt as though time had stopped. I backed away from the mirror, my heart hammering in my chest. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and took a step forward again, but when I looked into the mirror, the woman was gone. The reflection was clear again, just me. I stood there, staring at the now empty glass, trying to shake off the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. It had been a trick of the light, I told myself. Just exhaustion. I was imagining things. I tried to laugh it off, but the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. That night, I didn't sleep well. I tossed and turned, my mind racing, the image of the woman with the wide eyes replaying over and over in my head. The next day, I told myself it was nothing, that I had just been overtired, that I had seen a reflection that wasn't really there. But that night, when I went to bed, I found myself drawn to the mirror again. I don't know why I couldn't resist. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something deeper, something pulling me to that glass. But as I stood in front of it, I felt a strange chill in the air. The room seemed to grow quieter. The silence felt too heavy, as if the space between the walls was holding its breath, dumb. I slowly leaned in closer to the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. That's when I saw her again. The woman, standing there, just as she had before. This time, her face was closer to the glass, her eyes wide and fixed on mine. Her fingers twitched, and I watched, paralyzed, as she slowly raised her hand and waved once more. Her expression was the same, blank, yet somehow, expectant, as though she was waiting for me to do something. I took a step back, heart racing, my throat tightening. I couldn't breathe. My legs were frozen in place, and I stared at the mirror too terrified to turn away. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. The woman didn't speak, but I felt a voice inside my head, as clear as if she had whispered it aloud. "Come closer." I shook my head, backing away from the mirror, feeling my pulse quicken. The air felt thick again, oppressive. My breath came in shallow gasps as I grabbed the nearest object, a book, anything to distract me from the image in front of me. But the woman remained, her face pressed against the glass, her eyes never leaving mine. I didn't know how long. I stood there, too afraid to move, but when I finally tore my eyes away from the mirror, I rushed to my bed and pulled the covers over my head, my heart still racing. The room felt heavier now, filled with an overwhelming silence that I couldn't escape. The longer I lay there, the more I could feel something watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep. It didn't stop. Each night, the same thing happened. The mirror, always drawing me in, always reflecting the woman's face, her wide eyes staring at me. Every time she waved, it was slower, more deliberate, as if she was trying to communicate something. And every time, she would say the same thing in my mind: "Come closer." The fear became a constant, creeping presence in my life. I tried to cover the mirror, to block it from view, but it didn't matter. No matter where I turned, I could still feel her watching me, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt her there just behind the glass, waiting for me to come to her. The last time I looked into the mirror, I saw her once more. This time, she was different. Her eyes were no longer wide with blankness. They were filled with urgency, like she was desperate for me to understand. She wasn't just waving anymore. Her hand pressed against the glass, and I saw her lips move. She was mouthing something. "Come closer." I knew then what I had to do. I couldn't escape her. I couldn't run anymore. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the glass. The moment my fingertips made contact with the mirror, everything went still. The room, the air, everything became silent. I felt a pull, like something was drawing me in, tugging at me from the other side. I couldn't pull my hand away. It was as though the glass had become liquid, as if it was no longer a solid surface, but something that could reach out and pull me in. I stepped forward, and in that instant, the room grew cold. The whispers stopped. The pressure in the air became unbearable, and the world around me seemed to blur and twist. The reflection of the woman in the mirror was no longer just a reflection. She was there, on the other side, waiting for me. And then, everything went dark. I don't know what happened after that. When I woke up, I was back in my bed, but the mirror was gone. The room was the same, but the space felt emptier. I could still feel the presence, though lingering in the air. It was still watching. I don't know how, but I know it's still here, still waiting for me to return. And every night, I hear her whispering again, "Come closer." I don't remember exactly when it started. I think it was one of those nights when I was particularly tired, my mind too worn out to even think straight. But that's the thing with memories sometimes. You don't know when they actually begin. You just wake up one day, and the weight of them is already with you, like an old jacket you've been carrying for too long. It wasn't the typical kind of bad dream that you can chalk up to stress or a heavy dinner. It wasn't a nightmare of monsters or chases or falling. No, this felt different. I was alone in my room, just like any other night. The moonlight seeping through the blinds, casting faint shadows on the walls. But there was something in the stillness. Something I couldn't quite place. Something wrong. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the way it pressed down on me, like the air in the room had thickened. I felt it before I saw it, like the space in the room had been contaminated by something unseen. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I've always been an anxious sleeper, so I assumed it was just another odd sensation, something my mind conjured up as I was falling into sleep. But then I heard it, a soft, deliberate shift, like someone was moving in the room with me. My eyes shot open, heart hammering in my chest, but the room was still. The shadows still played along the walls, stretching and curling with the faint light, but there was no one there. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the unease, but that's when I saw it. At the foot of my bed, there was a man standing there. He wasn't moving, just standing completely still, almost blending into the shadows. But his presence was unmistakable. Something about the way he loomed, just at the edge of my sight, made my skin prickle. The air seemed to freeze, and all of a sudden, my breath came too quickly, too loudly. I wanted to scream, to move, but my body wouldn't listen. Diet. I was paralyzed, trapped in the bed, unable to tear my gaze away from him. The thing is, I don't know if he was real. I can't tell you if he was a figment of my imagination, a product of my half-dreaming mind. But I do know one thing. The longer I stared at him, the more I felt like he wasn't a stranger. He wasn't someone I had never seen before. No, I knew him. I didn't recognize his face, not in the traditional sense, but there was something in the way he stood there, in the way the shadows seemed to bend around him, that made it clear he knew me. The worst part, he knew everything. I don't know how I understood that, but the longer I looked at him, the more I felt it. He knew everything I had ever done, every thought I'd ever had. The things I was too afraid to admit, the things I buried so deep inside me, I thought I had forgotten them. It was like he was reading my mind, like he was inside me, pulling out all the darkest parts of me, the ones I never showed to anyone. I wanted to say something, to ask him what he wanted, to beg him to leave, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth felt dry, my chest tight, and all I could do was stare at him, the terror slowly creeping up my spine. My heart pounded, my breath shallow, as I waited for him to do something, anything. And then he spoke. "I know your secrets." The words were calm, cold, and they sent a shiver through me. They were soft, yet they echoed in my mind, like they had been planted there, not just spoken. There was no doubt in my mind that he knew things I had never told anyone. He knew about the nights I lay awake, haunted by things I had done in my past. He knew about the lies I told, the betrayals I kept hidden. He knew about the guilt I carried, the shame I could never shake. He knew about the parts of me I kept locked away, the parts I convinced myself weren't real. "I know what you did," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he were speaking directly to my soul. "I know everything." The room felt colder. The shadows on the walls grew longer. stretching toward me as if they, too, were reaching for me, pulling me into something I didn't want to understand. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't look away. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of his words, his presence. How did he know? Why was he here? He took a step forward, his figure becoming clearer in the dim light. But even as he moved, I noticed something strange. He wasn't casting a shadow. The light from the window should have created a dark outline of him, but there was nothing. Just an absence where a shadow should have been. I wanted to scream, to move, but my body was frozen. My eyes locked onto him. "You can't hide from me," he said, his voice now colder than before. It was as if the words weren't just coming from his mouth, but from the room itself, from the air around me. "I know you better than you know yourself." I could feel the weight of it, the weight of my past, the weight of all my darkest secrets pressing down on me. I wanted to ask him what he wanted, why he was here, but my voice failed me. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Until finally, he spoke again. "You'll never be free of them." The words hit me like a slap, ringing in my ears, and with them came a coldness so deep, I felt like I was falling into it. The darkness around him deepened, like the shadows themselves were consuming the room, swallowing it whole. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't escape. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. The air shifted back to normal. The room felt warmer again, the silence heavier than before. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window, the soft rhythm of it filling the void where he had been. I sat there, trembling, staring at the empty space where he had stood. My heart was still racing, my body still frozen with fear. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was a dream, or if it was something else, something I can't explain. But the next morning, I woke up, and the room was the same. The bed was the same. The apartment was the same. Everything was the same, but I felt different. I felt like something had changed, something deep inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, still watching me, still waiting for me to make my next move. And every night since then, when I lay in bed, I hear it, the faint whisper, just at the edge of my consciousness. "I know your secrets." I don't know if he's still here, but I can feel him, watching, waiting. And I can't help but wonder if he knows everything, or if, somehow, he's just waiting for me to admit it. It started as a simple precaution, locking all the doors before bed. I always locked up, even if I was just going to be home for a few hours. It was just part of my routine, something I'd grown up doing, and living alone in this old apartment. A place with creaky floors and too many dark corners. It seemed only natural to double-check the locks every night before settling in. That night, though, felt different from the start. I had come home later than usual after an exhausting day at work. The kind of day where everything goes wrong, where every task feels like it's dragging you through thick mud. I remember walking into the apartment, the usual smell of old wood and dust greeting me, and feeling that strange weight on my chest that came with the day's stress. The rain was coming down in sheets outside, tapping against the windows, and for a moment, I stood by the door, just listening to it. The sound of the storm outside felt like the perfect backdrop for my weary mind. I set my things down and started my usual routine. A cup of tea, a quick shower, and then I'd settle in for the night. But there was something about the apartment. That night, something off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Just a quiet unease in the back of my mind that I tried to shake off. After my shower, I walked around the apartment, checking all the windows, all the doors, just like I always did. Everything was locked. Everything was in place. I went over it a second time, just to be sure, locking the front door, checking the back door, the kitchen window, the bathroom window, and even the little window above the sink that looked out onto the alley behind the building. It wasn't paranoia, not really. It was just a habit. I finally went into the living room, sat down with my tea, and started to relax. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling through the trees, but the longer I sat there, the more I felt it's a feeling that something was wrong. Dunbay. I glanced around, the room dimly lit by the yellow glow of a single lamp. The shadows felt deeper tonight, like they were stretching into corners where they didn't belong. It was that sensation of not being alone, even though I knew, of course, that I was. I tried to push it away, but it wouldn't leave. The air felt thicker, almost oppressive, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart race just a little bit faster. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves, the rain, the darkness. But then, I heard it. A soft tap, barely noticeable at first. It came from the direction of the kitchen. I froze, the cup of tea still in my hands. The house was silent except for the rain, but then, another tap, louder this time. It came from the door leading into the hallway. My heart jumped into my throat. I set the cup down, my fingers trembling, and stood up. I walked slowly to the kitchen, my breath shallow. It was almost as if my body was moving on its own, pulled by some instinct I didn't understand. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the living room lamp behind me. I reached the door that led to the back of the apartment and twisted the handle. The door was locked. I stepped back, breathing harder now, my pulse quickening. My mind raced, running through the possibilities. Could it be the wind, the building settling, my own imagination playing tricks? I walked back into the living room, trying to reassure myself. I checked my phone. It was only 10:30. I wasn't that tired, and I definitely wasn't seeing things. But then another tap, this time from the window. I spun around, eyes wide. As I saw the curtains shift, just the faintest movement, like a breath of air brushing against it. I couldn't move. I stood there, staring at it, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. Tap. The tap, the whisper of fabric moving, felt deliberate, like it was waiting for me to notice. I'm alone, I told myself. I locked every door. I turned the light up higher and walked toward the window, my fingers trembling as I reached for the blinds. I peered outside, looking into the empty alley below. It was completely dark, the rain streaking the windows, blurring everything. Nothing was there, but my skin crawled, and the feeling in my chest didn't fade. I walked to the door again, my pulse thundering. I double-checked the locks, every single one. I looked out the peephole. Nothing. I couldn't see anything in the hallway. No shadows, no figures. I thought, it's just me. It's just my nerves. I locked everything, and then I heard it. the unmistakable sound of the back door creaking open. I spun around, breath catching in my throat. My stomach dropped. There, in the dim light of the hallway, the door stood ajar. The handle had turned by itself, and the door had opened just wide enough for someone to slip through. I rushed forward, my hands shaking, closing it with a force I didn't know I had. It shut with a resounding thud, and I bolted the lock. I stood there for a moment, just listening to my heart pound in my chest. I checked everything again, every door, every window. I went through the motions, double-checking the locks, but the weight of the silence pressed in on me. There was a feeling I couldn't shake. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to sit down, my head spinning, my thoughts racing. I was alone, I told myself again. I locked every door, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It intensified. Like someone was standing just out of sight, waiting for me to look. Finally, I lay down, exhausted, but not daring to sleep. I couldn't close my eyes, not with the feeling that someone was there, just outside of my view. And that's when I heard it. A soft, deliberate creak from the hallway. I knew then, he was already inside. He didn't need the door. He didn't need the windows. He had been there all along, and somehow, no matter how many doors I locked, I would never be able to lock him out. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I first noticed her on a Tuesday night. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the rain drizzles softly against the windows and the world outside seems far away. I had just finished my dinner, the simple kind of meal you eat when you don't feel like cooking a sandwich, maybe, and a cup of tea. I was still a little restless, my mind running through the day's events. So I decided to turn off the lights and sit in the living room, just watching the rain. I had a small apartment on the second floor of an old building, and from the window, you could see the street below, bathed in the soft glow of street lamps. The window was cracked open just a little enough for the cool night air to mix with the warmth of the room, the way I liked it. It was peaceful. Until I saw her. At first, I thought I had imagined it. A shadow, just a fleeting movement outside the window, something in the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there she was, standing in the alley across the street. Just standing there. She was still, her figure outlined by the pale light from the street. She was too far for me to see her clearly, but even from that distance, something about her made my stomach drop. She was facing directly toward me, her body slightly hunched, but her head tilted up, staring right at my window. I didn't know what to make of it. I figured it was just someone passing by, maybe a late-night walker who had stopped for a moment. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She wasn't moving, not at all, just standing there, gazing up at the window. I shook my head and turned away, telling myself I was being paranoid. I made myself busy with a book, something to distract myself, but every so often my eyes would drift back toward the window, where she remained, still staring, unmoving. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled the curtains closed, blocking the view. I convinced myself that I was just imagining things, that it was nothing. A person, a random passerby, nothing to worry about. I went to bed a little later, trying to shake off the strange feeling in my gut. I didn't sleep well that night, tossing and turning, the image of her still in my mind. I kept imagining her face, her pale skin, her dark eyes locked on mine, and for some reason, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that I was being watched. The next night, she was there again. This time, I was prepared. I stayed up a little later, just to see if it was a coincidence. And sure enough, just as the clock struck midnight, there she was again, standing outside the window in the same place, staring in. Her posture was rigid, unnatural, like she wasn't just standing there but waiting for something. I couldn't explain why I didn't call the police. Something told me that would only make it worse, that the act of drawing attention to her would make her more real, more present. So instead, I did what I had done the night before. I closed the curtains and tried to push the image out of my mind. But the next few nights, she was there. Always outside my window after dark. I don't know how she knew where I lived. I don't know why she was standing there. But each night she was there, staring up at the window with that unnerving stillness, like she was waiting for me to look, waiting for me to acknowledge her presence. By the fourth night, I had stopped pretending it was nothing. I couldn't get any rest, and every time I tried to fall asleep, I could feel her out there, watching. The apartment felt colder, emptier, and the sense of being watched never left me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out who she was. I went down to the alley the next evening, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was just a person, a random stranger, someone with no ill intentions. But when I reached the spot where she had stood, the alley was empty. No trace of anyone. No footprints in the dirt. No signs that anyone had even been there. The air in the alley was cold, and I suddenly felt a wave of panic. Like I was in the wrong place, like I had crossed a boundary. I turned around quickly and rushed back to my apartment, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. When I got back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been followed. The air felt heavy, thick with the sense of something lurking just out of sight. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed up, watching the street outside, the window dark and silent. But I couldn't bring myself to open the blinds. I kept thinking about what I had seen, the way she stood there, unmoving, her eyes never leaving me. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who was she? Why was she outside my window every night? And most importantly, what did she want? The days blurred together. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't stop thinking about her. And then, just as I thought I might be going mad, I saw her again. It was different this time. She wasn't standing in the alley anymore. No, she was closer. She was standing on the sidewalk directly across from my apartment building, just outside the window, staring in. But this time, she wasn't just staring. She was mouthing something, her lips barely moving as she whispered into the night, "Come outside." The chill that ran through me made my skin crawl. It was like a cold wave washing over me, and I felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I backed away from the window slowly, my body trembling with fear. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing in as I tried to convince myself it was all just a nightmare, some insane trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't explain how I knew, but somehow I understood. She wasn't just standing there. She wasn't just waiting. She was calling me. And worse, Stilly was starting to feel the pull. Something in the back of my mind urged me to go to her, to step outside into the darkness where she stood. I've locked the window now, bolted. It's shut with everything I have. I've covered every other window with blankets, with furniture. I don't know who she is or what she wants, but I know one thing for certain now. She's always waiting outside my window after dark, and sooner or later, I know I'll have to face her. I don't know if I'll make it out the other side. It started innocently enough, like the kind of strange feeling you get when you wake up too quickly or stare into the dark for too long. A sense of discomfort. That's how I would describe it, something that made me uneasy in my own room, in my own bed. At first, I thought it was just the stress. Work had been overwhelming, and my sleep patterns had been all over the place. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, with a slight sense of panic. But the more I tried to explain it away, the stronger that feeling became. And the worst part, I couldn't shake the thought that something was there, watching me whenever I slept. I know. It sounds insane. I thought so too. But there's a certain way the air feels when you're lying in bed, completely still, knowing that something isn't quite right. It's like the room shifts when you're not looking, the shadows bending in a way they shouldn't. You can almost feel the presence of something else in the room, breathing the same air you are, lingering just out of sight. It didn't help that I lived in an old building, a converted loft with creaky floors and narrow hallways, the kind of place where the walls seem to sigh at night, where the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows adds an eerie soundtrack to the stillness. But this wasn't just the house making noises. No, this was something else, something that felt wrong. Something that, as silly as it sounds, knew I was there. It started with small things, a shifting in the dark, a slight brush against the back of my neck when I was lying in bed, a fleeting sensation of something moving, just beyond my sight. At first, I convinced myself it was just the wind, but then I began waking up at odd hours, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. Unable to remember falling asleep or how long I had been out. Each time, I would glance around the room, the silence almost deafening, the shadows too thick. And then, one night, it happened. I woke up, the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. I could feel the weight of the room, the way the air was thick with something I couldn't name. My eyes darted around the space, scanning the familiar my dresser, the old rocking chair by the window, my desk against the far wall, exactly where they should be. Everything was still silent. But then, just as I started to relax, something caught my eye. In the corner of the room, near the ceiling, something moved. I couldn't quite make it out at first. It was too fast, too subtle, but there it was. A flicker of motion, just out of reach. I blinked, heart skipping a beat, and I saw it again. A shadow, no more than a shadow, sliding along the wall, closer to me. It didn't belong there, didn't move like the normal shifts of the room or the shadows cast by the moonlight. It was deliberate, intentional. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond. My limbs felt frozen, as if some invisible weight was pressing me into the mattress. I could barely breathe, my throat tight, and all I could do was watch. The shape, dark and indistinct, grew larger. It didn't have a definite form, more like a blur of shadows that shifted and rippled in the dim light. It was moving toward me, slowly, like it was savoring each inch, each second. It stopped just at the edge of the bed, and for the first time, I felt that something was standing there, watching me. My skin prickled, my pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It was like a hand was pressed against my mouth, forcing the sound back into my chest. My eyes were locked on the shape in the corner, my mind screaming for me to move, to get up, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. The darkness in the corner shifted again. This time, it didn't just flicker, it reached out. Long, thin tendrils, like fingers, extending toward me. They were so impossibly long, so twisted, that I couldn't believe they were part of anything that belonged in the room. They stretched, inch by inch, reaching over the bed toward me. I tried to scream again. I tried to get out of bed, to get away from it, but all I could do was lie there, completely still, paralyzed. I was trapped under its gaze. I could feel it in my chest, like it was pulling the breath right from my lungs. And then it spoke. The voice was like a rasping whisper, so soft that at first I couldn't make out the words. But then, clear as day, it came again. I've been watching you sleep. The cold terror in those words made my skin crawl, the weight of them pressing down on me harder than ever before. It was real. It was happening. Something was watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge it, to give it my attention. I could feel its presence in every corner of the room, the air around me vibrating with something ancient, something hungry. The voice came again, louder this time, more insistent. I'm getting closer. I couldn't look away. The tendrils were so close now, only inches from me. I could feel their coldness, like ice on my skin, as they hovered over me. The smell of something rancid filled the room, thick and suffocating, making my stomach churn. I wanted to tear my eyes away, but I couldn't. It was as if something inside me had locked me in place, forced me to face it, to endure the waiting presence. And then, with a sudden jolt, I was awake. My heart was still pounding, my body slick with sweat. I was gasping for air, my breath coming in shallow bursts. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the darkness around me. The room was quiet, too quiet. No movement, no shapes in the corners. It was just me, lying in my bed, the rain still pattering softly against the window. I don't know if I was dreaming or if I was awake. The line between the two has become so thin. Every night since, I've woken up feeling watched, the pressure in the room thickening as soon as my eyes close. I've stopped sleeping with the lights off. I can't sleep in silence anymore. The whispers are always just beneath the surface, and I know deep down I can feel it getting closer. And every night, when I try to fall asleep, I hear the words again. Soft, but unmistakable. I'm getting closer. It was a typical night, or at least, it started out that way. The kind of quiet evening where nothing extraordinary happens, just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, and the peaceful rhythm of my breath as I settled into bed. I was tired more than usual, having spent the entire day running errands and catching up on work. So, when I finally pulled the covers up around me, I was ready for rest. The room was dark, the air cool, and the only light was from the faint street lamp outside my window. I don't know when I drifted off to sleep. It could have been a few minutes, or it could have been hours. But somewhere between the turning of the world and the closing of my eyes, I slipped into that quiet abyss. I woke up in the middle of the night, a little disoriented, unsure of what had roused me. I turned over, blinking into the darkness. The only sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic breathing of my girlfriend Anna next to me. She had been sleeping soundly for the past hour, her body curled under the blankets beside me. But as I lay there, trying to fall back asleep, something caught my eye. She was facing me, her head resting on the pillow. Her features looked soft, relaxed, the kind of peaceful expression you expect when someone is asleep. But something about it felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. There was an odd stillness in the room, like the world had paused, holding its breath. And then I saw it. Her lips were curled, not in a frown, not in sleep's usual soft expression. No, she was smiling. But it wasn't a gentle smile. It was something darker. Her lips were twisted slightly, just enough to make it unsettling. It was a slow, almost imperceptible change, something you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking closely. The smile was faint, but it was there, stretched across her face in the quiet of the room. I blinked, thinking I was imagining it. It must have been the shadows, or maybe the way the dim light from the street lamp filtered in, casting strange shapes in the darkness. But when I looked again, it was still there. That smile, frozen on her face. A wave of discomfort washed over me, and I sat up slightly in bed, staring at her. The longer I watched, the more unnerving it became. I could feel my heart rate quicken, the warmth of the blankets suddenly stifling. The smile didn't match her usual peaceful sleep expression. It wasn't something sweet or comforting. No, it was unnatural. I leaned over, hoping to wake her up, to get some semblance of normality back into the situation. I reached out, gently shaking her shoulder, trying to rouse her from her sleep. "Anna," I whispered, my voice hesitant. "Hey, wake up," but she didn't stir. I shook her again, a little firmer this time. Her body shifted under the blankets, but her face remained the same, her smile still there, frozen in place. Her eyes stayed closed, her breathing steady, as though nothing was wrong. But the smile, it didn't fade. I pulled my hand back, unsure of what to do. My stomach twisted with unease. Why wasn't she waking up? This wasn't like her. Usually, she was a light sleeper, quick to wake if something disturbed her. But tonight, she was unresponsive, as though she were in some sort of deep sleep, or worse, pretending to sleep. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was having a dream, a weird one. But this didn't feel like a dream. This felt like something else. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the smile on her face looking even more grotesque in the darkness. It didn't belong. It wasn't her. I decided to leave it alone, thinking that maybe I was just overreacting, that I was imagining things after. A long, exhausting day. I turned over in bed, trying to settle back into sleep, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop thinking about it, the smile, frozen on her face, the way it didn't seem right. So I kept my eyes open, my body tense, listening for any sign of movement from her, hoping to hear her stir, to see her wake up like she always did. But the night dragged on, and nothing changed. By morning, I had barely slept. The unease still lingered, clinging to me as I moved around the apartment, going through the motions of my routine. But when I glanced at Anna, still asleep beside me, I noticed something else. The smile was gone. Her face was back to its usual peaceful expression, her features relaxed in slumber. I almost felt relieved, but there was a nagging feeling at the back of my mind. As I looked at her, I couldn't shake the thought that something had happened. Something that wasn't quite normal. When she finally woke up, I couldn't bring myself to ask her about it, not directly. I felt foolish. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But when she smiled at me, I noticed it again. For just a split second, the faintest hint of that same smile, and my stomach dropped. "Good morning," she said, stretching as she sat up. I tried to smile back, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The smile, the way it had felt wrong, how it had stayed on her face as she slept. I tried to shake it off, tried to pretend that nothing was wrong, but a part of me, deep down, was still unsettled. That night, I lay in bed, watching her sleep, unable to close my eyes. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. The oppressive silence. I thought about the smile, about the way it lingered, and I couldn't escape the thought that it had been more than just a dream, more than just a trick of the light. And then, in the dead of night, I heard it, the softest whisper from her side of the bed, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. "I'm not alone." The words were barely audible, but they sent a chill through me. My eyes snapped open, and I turned toward her, but her face was calm, peaceful once again, her lips pressed together in sleep. I couldn't shake it. That feeling, the one I couldn't explain, settled into the pit of my stomach again. The smile, the whisper, it all felt like something I wasn't meant to understand. Something was wrong, and it wasn't her. I just don't know what it is, but I can't escape it. Every time I look at her, every time she smiles, there's that feeling, that thing I can't explain. Something that isn't quite her, something that's hiding behind her eyes. And every night, when I lie awake, I wonder when I'll catch her smiling again. Kush. It began as a small observation, something I probably would have never thought twice about if I hadn't been so tired, so worn out from the constant grind of life. But as the days passed, it became harder to ignore. She was always an early riser, the kind of person who wakes up with the sun, full of energy and enthusiasm. Me, I've always been more of a night owl, drawn to the quiet solitude of the late hours when everything is still, and the world feels like it's holding its breath. So when we moved in together, we naturally developed a routine, a silent understanding of each other's habits. I would stay up late, reading or working, and she would fall asleep early, nestled beside me, her breathing soft and even. It was a simple rhythm, a dance that didn't require words. But then, one night, I noticed something strange. I had been reading in bed, as I often did when I glanced over at her. She was lying there, her body perfectly still, as though she had already drifted off to sleep. The room was dim, the light from my bedside lamp casting gentle shadows on the walls. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed it, her eyes. She wasn't blinking. I squinted, unsure if I was imagining it. I had been reading for a while, my eyes tired from the page, but I was certain now. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the ceiling, the faintest glimmer of light reflected off her irises, and I could see the slight shimmer of her pupils, unmoving, unblinking. I tried to shake it off. Maybe she was in a deep, peaceful sleep. But something about it unsettled me. The stillness of her body, the way her eyes stayed wide open, never once fluttering closed like they should. It felt wrong, like there was something unnatural about it. I tried to focus on my book again, but my mind kept drifting back to her. I had seen her fall asleep countless times, seen her eyes close slowly, her body relax into the softness of the bed. But now it was like she was pretending to sleep, but somehow holding on to something, some edge of consciousness. It was disorienting, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Maybe she was just in some deep, weird kind of slumber, I thought. Maybe it was nothing. But the next night, it happened again, and the night after that. Every time I glanced at her in the dark, her eyes were wide open, still unblinking, like she was watching me. The feeling it gave me was subtle at first, and unease I could brush off as exhaustion. But as the days went on, I began to feel watched in my own bed. I couldn't shake the sensation that she wasn't asleep at all, that her eyes were always on me, silently observing, silently waiting. One night, I decided to test it. I lay in bed, pretending to fall asleep, waiting for her to do the same. After a while, I shifted, turning over so I could see her face more clearly in the dim light. Her eyes were still open, her pupils slightly dilated, unmoving. I waited, holding my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence in the room grew oppressive, thick, suffocating. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. "Are you awake?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't respond, but I didn't expect her to. It was as if she couldn't hear me, as if I didn't exist to her in that moment. She was still pretending to sleep, but her eyes never moved, never blinked. I tried to shake the sense of dread that washed over me. I felt like I was going crazy, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The more I stared at her, the more I realized that she wasn't pretending to sleep for me, or for any reason I could understand. It was something deeper. It was as if she was stuck, trapped in a state where she couldn't let go, couldn't blink, couldn't close her eyes, because if she did, she would lose whatever it was that was keeping her conscious. And that's when I began to notice other things. Her movements, queer, were slow, almost mechanical, like she was running on autopilot. Sometimes, when I spoke to her in the morning, she would respond, but her voice sounded distant, disconnected, as if she wasn't fully present. Her gaze would drift off, like she was looking through me instead of at me. Sometimes, when I caught her staring at the ceiling, I'd ask if everything was okay, and she'd blink rapidly, like she was snapping out of some trance, only to give me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was like she wasn't herself anymore. And then came the night that changed everything. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, my body cold with sweat, my heart racing. The room was still dark, but I could feel something had shifted. I glanced over at her, and as usual, her eyes were open, staring at nothing. But this time, there was something different. Her eyes were no longer still, they were moving. Not in the usual way, where they'd just flicker or twitch. No, they were scanning, slowly, methodically, like they were searching for something, or someone. I sat up, unable to breathe. My mind screamed at me to say something, to wake her up, but I couldn't. I just watched. Her gaze finally settled on me, and that's when I saw it. There was something behind her eyes. Something dark. Something that shouldn't have been there. I don't know how to explain it, but in that moment, I felt it. I felt it deep in my bones. The presence of something else. Something that had taken hold of her, using her eyes like windows into another world. "I'm not asleep," she whispered, so quietly that I could barely hear it. Her lips barely moved, but the words were crystal clear. And for the first time, I felt the truth of it. She wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't sleeping. She was awake, but not the way I had thought. Something was watching through her eyes. Something that wasn't her. I don't know how long. I sat there, my mind unraveling in the silence of the room, but when I finally gathered the strength to speak, it was too late. She turned away, the movement stiff, almost unnatural. Her eyes never blinked, and I was left in the dark, knowing she wasn't alone. I haven't slept since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I can feel her watching me, and I'm terrified of what might be behind her unblinking gaze. It all started a few months ago. I moved into this apartment told, a little rundown, but cheap, and in a quiet part of town where everything felt distant. The building was a bit too cold in the winter and too hot in the summer, but the rent was good. I didn't mind the quirks of the place, creaky floors, the way the windows rattled when the wind picked up, or the fact that the air conditioning always sounded like it was about to break. These were just small inconveniences, things I could live with. But then there was the vent. It's not that the vent itself was particularly odd. It was old. Yes, probably one of the original features of the building. A square metallic grate, mounted high on the wall in the hallway right outside my bedroom. It led into the ventilation system of the building. There was nothing remarkable about it, really. I had seen it the first time I came into the apartment and thought nothing of it. Just another vent, just another part of the apartment's quirks. But I noticed something strange on the first night I stayed here. It wasn't the noise, though the vent did make a low, distant hum, especially when the heating kicked in. No, what got my attention was the shape. The shape I swore I saw inside the vent. I had just turned the lights off, ready to sleep. The room was mostly dark, save for the faint streetlight filtering through the blinds. I lay there, eyes wide open, trying to relax, when I noticed it. For a split second, I thought it was just the shadow streak of the light, maybe. But then I saw it again. Something moving. Or, not moving, exactly, but something there. Something watching. At first I thought I was imagining it. The shadows playing tricks on me. But as I stared, unable to look away, I realized there were eyes. Eyes inside the vent. They weren't large, but they were distinct, dark, glossy, and they stared back at me with an intensity I couldn't quite explain. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked rapidly, hoping the image would go away, but when I opened my eyes again, they were still there. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, they just watched. I sat up slowly, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a shadow, a trick of the light, or some odd reflection off the metal grate. But the longer I stared at the vent, the clearer the eyes became. They weren't shadows, they were real. I don't know how long I sat there, staring, too frightened to move. Eventually, I managed to convince myself I was being ridiculous, that It was just some weird trick of my mind. I turned over and tried to sleep, pulling the covers up tightly around me, trying to block out the thought of those eyes, but they lingered, sitting in the back of my mind like a heavy weight. The next morning, the eyes were gone. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. After all, nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I had stayed in old places with old vents before, and I had never seen anything like that. So I brushed it off as a freak moment of tiredness, a visual hallucination from too much stress. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was more aware of it, watching with nervous anticipation as I got into bed. I waited, almost dreading what I would see. And sure enough, as the room fell silent, I saw the eyes again. They were back, sitting there in the vent, just as still as before. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to call someone, to turn on the lights, but I couldn't make my body respond. I sat there in the dark, heart hammering, just watching the eyes. And that's when it happened. They moved. Just a little at first. One of them twitched. A slight shift, as though it was following me, watching me closely. It was the smallest motion, but it sent a jolt of terror through me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the vent, and the longer I stared, the more the eyes seemed to shift, becoming more intense, more aware of me. And that's when I knew. The eyes weren't just watching me, they were waiting. Waiting for something. I don't know how long I stayed awake, staring at the vent. I'm not sure if I ever actually fell asleep that night, or if I just passed out from exhaustion. The next morning, the eyes were gone again, but the fear remained. I spent the entire day trying to convince myself it was a figment of my imagination, a bizarre fluke. But when night came, I couldn't help but feel the unease creeping back into my bones. I lay in bed, waiting for the eyes to reappear, feeling the weight of their gaze on me, even when I wasn't looking, and they did return, every single night. Each time, they were still, unblinking, unmoving, watching. But each time, they got closer. The eyes would shift, slowly, until they seemed to be watching me with a deep, unsettling awareness. But tonight, something was different. I had tried everything, turning the light on, covering the vent with a blanket, even calling maintenance to check the vent for any possible explanations, but nothing changed. The eyes came back every night, just as persistent, just as unnerving. But tonight, they weren't still anymore. Tonight, they moved. Not in the same way, not as if they were simply following my gaze. No, tonight they emerged, slowly, carefully, as if they were crawling out from the darkness of the vent, slipping, free of their prison, inching toward me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I watched, paralyzed in bed, as the eyes grew larger. And then, something more. Something I couldn't fully comprehend. Something shifting behind the eyes. A face, a shape. It was hard to tell, but whatever it was closer. And it knew I was watching. It knew I had been watching all this time. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as if it were pressing down on me. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to move with the eyes, twisting, bending into shapes I couldn't recognize. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as the eyes in the vent grew nearer, and the shape behind them seemed to grow clearer, as though it was coming for me. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, it stopped. The vent was silent. The eyes were gone. The room was still. But I know it's not over. Every night, I wait. I know it's coming back. And I know now that it's not just watching me. It's waiting for me to move. I woke up in a cold sweat, my breath shallow and erratic. My mind was still tangled in the remnants of a nightmare. The kind that lingers long after you've woken. But there was something else. Something that felt wrong. The room was dark, save for the faint light filtering through the cracks in the curtains. Everything was quiet, too quiet. But it wasn't the silence that unsettled me. No, it was the feeling of something off. Something I couldn't explain, but that was there. In the space around me, through it. I reached up to wipe the sweat from my brow, but that's when I froze. My hand was already there. On my face. More specifically, over my mouth. It wasn't my fingers, though. It was the feeling of someone else's hand fingers. Pressed firmly over my lips, a weight I couldn't move. The coldness of it seeped through my skin, and I could feel the imprint of someone's touch. But there was no one in the room with me. No one near me. I could hear the soft hum of the apartment around me, the faint creaking of the old walls, the distant sounds of the city, but there was no one else here. I could barely breathe. Panic shot through me, my chest tightening as I tried to make sense of it. I moved my head, trying to shake the hand off, but the pressure against my mouth didn't budge. It was firm, unyielding, like it belonged there. I could feel the imprint of each finger pressing into my skin, cold, unnatural, and I had no idea what was happening. I tried to scream, to call out, but nothing came. No sound. The weight of the hand over my mouth stifled every attempt, leaving me gasping in desperation, my heart hammering in my chest. I managed to force my body to move, my arms trembling as I lifted them and tried to pry the hand away from my face. My fingers brushed the cold, unyielding pressure of the hand, but it wouldn't budge. It was there, holding me down, as if it was waiting for me to realize something I wasn't meant to. I was paralyzed, caught between a waking nightmare and the terrifying reality that no one was in the room with me. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the hand was gone. It wasn't like it faded away, it simply wasn't there anymore. One moment, I could feel it, cold and heavy over my mouth, and the next, it was just gone. I gasped for air, my lungs burning with the sudden rush of oxygen. I pulled my hands away from my face, scrambling to sit up, looking around the room. With wide eyes, there was no one. No one in the room with me. The hand was gone. I was alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, that it had touched me, held me down, and then left without a trace. I looked at the ceiling, at the corners of the room, expecting to see some shadow, some evidence that I hadn't imagined it, but nothing. Just the soft glow of the moonlight and the quiet hum of the night. I tried to calm my breathing, my hands shaking as I wiped my face. I told myself it was just a dream, some lingering feeling from a bad nightmare, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't just a dream. The hand had been real. Too real. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, my eyes darting around the room, waiting for something, anything that would explain what had just happened. But there was nothing. Just silence. Just the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I had been half dreaming, caught between sleep and wakefulness. I tried to rationalize. But the moment I stepped out of bed, something caught my eye. Something I hadn't noticed before. The imprint on my face. There, just below my lips, was a faint mark, a red, finger-like indentation. Almost like someone had pressed their hand against me, leaving a bruise in the shape of fingers. I stared at it in shock, my hand instinctively going to my mouth, feeling the tender, raised skin where the hand had been. It was there. It was real. I don't know what happened that night, or who or what was in my room with me. I don't know if it was a dream or something worse. But I know one thing for sure now. I wasn't alone. And I don't think I ever will be again. It's been weeks now, but I still can't make sense of it. Every night, she stands at my door. Every single night. I don't know when it started. I don't know why it started, but I've stopped sleeping, stopped pretending that everything is normal. It began so quietly that at first I thought I was just imagining it. I was living alone in a small apartment, far from my family, in a city I barely knew. It wasn't that I had any particular reason to feel uneasy, but sometimes the silence in the apartment was thick, pressing against me in ways I couldn't shake. I started to feel the weight of being alone, even in a city full of people. At first, the nights were peaceful. I would go to bed at the usual time, pull the covers up, and settle into the dark, listening to the sound of the rain tapping against the windows. Sometimes I would hear the hum of the fridge, or the distant murmur of traffic outside. But those sounds were comforting. They were familiar. They filled the silence in ways that made the apartment feel like a home. But then it started. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a faint sound from the hallway. Like a footstep, a shuffle, something small but definite. It always happened after I had settled into bed, just as I was drifting off to sleep. At first I thought it was just the building settling, the creak of old wood or the rustling of something in the walls. But the sound continued, night after night, always just outside my bedroom door. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just my imagination, the effect of living alone. But then, one night, I woke up and saw her. She was standing at my door. I didn't even know I had woken up at first. My eyes were heavy with sleep, and my mind still foggy. But there was something that pulled me out of the dreamlike haze. I turned toward the door, half expecting to see the usual shadows from the dim light outside my window. But instead, I saw her standing there in the hallway, facing the door. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, her figure cloaked in darkness, her silhouette faintly illuminated by the small sliver of light from the hallway. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a trick of my tired mind, but then I saw her more clearly. Her form was unmistakable, the way she stood so still, like she was waiting for something, waiting for me to notice. I should have gotten up. I should have called out, done anything to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But I couldn't. I just stared at her, my body frozen, my heart thudding in my chest. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, her eyes never leaving the door, never moving. And then, without a sound, she slowly turned away and disappeared into the dark hallway. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was a dream. a hallucination brought on by stress, by the isolation of living alone. But that night, she came again. And every night after that, every night, without fail, she stands at my door. She doesn't knock. She doesn't speak. She just stands there, staring at the door as if she's waiting for something to happen. Sometimes she stands perfectly still, her figure blending with the shadows. And other times, I can see her hands twitching at her sides, like she's trying to move, but can't. She never enters. She never comes inside. She just stands there. And the worst part, the thing that gnaws at me, that keeps me awake at night, is that every time I turn to face her, her eyes seem to be different. The first time I saw her, her eyes were dark, deep, almost hollow. But as the nights passed, they began to change. They became more real, more familiar. I would see her eyes flicker, just for a moment, and I could swear that she knew me, that she recognized me. I stopped trying to sleep. I stopped pretending I could ignore it. Every night, I would stay awake, watching the door, waiting for her to come. The sound of her shuffling footsteps outside my room became a constant in my life. The scratching of her feet against the floorboards like a clock ticking, counting down to something. But she never came in. She never crossed the threshold. The worst part, I couldn't escape her. I tried closing the door, locking it, even putting a chair against the handle. But the next night, the door was always open again, and there she was, standing in the same place, exactly where I had last seen her. I wanted to leave. I wanted to go anywhere else, to escape this apartment, but something held me here. Something kept me here, like I was bound to the space by invisible threads. And every time I tried to leave, the door would open, and she would be there, staring at me, waiting for me to cross the line. But I never did. I never could. I don't know who she is, or why she's here, but I've learned something over the past few weeks. She's not waiting for me to come to her. She's waiting for me to invite her in. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep living like this, watching her stand at my door, waiting for me to do something. I don't know what will happen when she finally steps inside, but I do know one thing. Every night, when I lie in bed, I can feel her. There, just outside my door, waiting for me to make the mistake of opening it. And every night, I don't. It's the quiet ones that always catch you off guard, isn't it? The nights when everything seems normal, when you think you're finally safe, that's when it happens. At least, that's how it started. I've always been a heavy sleeper. I could sleep through anything. A thunderstorm, the loudest conversations. Even my alarm clock ringing for 10 minutes straight. I'm used to it, you know? So when I moved into this new apartment, it didn't take long for me to settle in. It was a little smaller than my last place, but it had a cozy charm to it, a quietness that made it feel like home. At first, everything was fine. I'd go to bed every night around the same time, pull the curtains closed, and drift off without a second thought. But then, after a few weeks, I noticed something. Nothing too alarming at first, just a small, unsettling thing. Shadow. It wasn't much at first. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see it, a dark shape behind the curtains. Not quite formed, but definitely there. At first, I thought it was the light from the street lamp outside, casting strange shadows through the fabric. Or maybe It was just the folds of the curtain shifting, creating odd angles that looked like something moving. I convinced myself it was nothing. I did what anyone would do. I adjusted the curtains, moved the furniture around, and went back to sleep. But every night, without fail, I would wake up at the same time, around 2 a.m. It was always the same unsettling weight in the air, the room too still, too quiet, and that damn shadow, still behind the curtain. I began to notice that the shape wasn't just a random anomaly, it seemed alive. It wasn't like the usual play of light and shadow. This thing seemed to move with intent. Sometimes it would stretch, long and thin, across the curtain, reaching for the edges of the window. Other times, it would curl up into a tight knot, like it was trying to hide from view. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had to see it. So, despite the tightness in my chest, the unease creeping up my spine, I got out of bed. I reached for the edge of the curtain, my fingers trembling. The room was cold, the air heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain. I pulled the curtain back, expecting to see nothing more than the usual shadows, maybe a tree branch outside swaying in the wind, or a light flickering in the alley. But what I saw made my stomach churn. The shadow was there, but it wasn't just behind the curtain anymore. It had moved. It was pressed up against the fabric, as if something was inside it, trying to get out. The shape seemed to writhe, like it had a life of its own, stretching and contorting in unnatural ways. My heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled backward, the curtain slipping from my hands. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I wanted to scream, but my mouth wouldn't work. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure: it was moving when I breathed. I could feel it. Every time I exhaled, the shadow shifted, creeping closer to the fabric, as though it was responding to me. Each slow breath seemed to make it grow, stretch, and twist in ways that didn't make sense. It was like the shadow was feeding on my breath, responding to the rise and fall of my chest. I stepped back quickly, my legs shaky, and for a moment, I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know if I was dreaming or if something had taken root in my apartment. But before I could move, the shadow pressed even harder against the curtain. I watched in horror as it pushed its way through. The fabric itself, as if it was too big for the space it had been given, like it was trying to break free. I ran to the window, yanked the curtains open as quickly as I could, and there was nothing but the empty street, the faint glow of the streetlights, and the quiet hum of the city outside. The shadow was gone. The room felt suddenly too quiet, too still. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what had been there, just behind the curtain, waiting. I locked the windows that night, the curtains pulled tight, but that strange, suffocating feeling stayed with me. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, too afraid that if I closed my eyes, the shadow would come back. In the days that followed, the feeling of being watched never left me. I'd glance at the curtains, half expecting the shadow to return. And sometimes, when the sun dipped below the horizon, I'd catch a flicker in the corner of my eye, a hint of movement in the fabric, just as I was about to fall asleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow had learned me, that it knew how I breathed, how I slept, how I lived. That every night, when I lay still, when I exhaled, it would get closer. That it had been waiting all along, lurking just out of sight, responding to the rhythm of my breaths. I don't sleep well anymore. And the worst part, I don't think I'm alone in this room anymore. Not really. The shadow is still there, behind the curtains, watching, waiting for me to fall asleep. And every time I breathe, I feel it get a little closer.